Before the video starts, please hit the subscribe button and please click the notification bell every time I upload a new video. Now let's get into the video. Hey guys, welcome back to Sosa Reactions. Welcome to my first ever YouTube video, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 most underrated NBA off seasons. It could be about the best underrated trades, underrated free agent signings, and underrated draft prospects who got under the radar. And this video could really be about anything. And let's move on to our number 5 spot, which is the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics are a great NBA franchise, but they just couldn't get out the East for the past 3 to 4 seasons. They've been to the Eastern Conference Finals 3 times in the past 4 seasons, and they just couldn't get out. They've really sucked at the bench depth and their center especially because they just can't get anybody. But now they got Jeff Teague, who's averaging 11 points, 5 assists, 2.5 rebounds, and shooting 36% from the 3, and Tristan Thompson, who is averaging 12 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks, and 1 steal per game. They're both underrated players in their positions and respectable players too. Boston's offseason grade definitely for me has to be a B-. It's a great offseason, but they could have gotten maybe one more prospect, but it's all good. Moving on to my number 4 spot, it's the Los Angeles Clippers. The Los Angeles Clippers were supposed to be the 2020 NBA champions, but they lost in the second round because of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard's disappearance in the playoffs. They signed Luke Kennard, who averaged 15.8 points per game, 4.1 assists per game, and 3.5 rebounds per game. He had a breakout season this year, shooting 39.9% from the 3 on 6.5 attempts per game. They also signed another underrated player in Serge Ibaka. Serge Ibaka is a great defensive player who's also pretty good on offense. He averaged 15.4 points per game, 8.2 rebounds per game, and 1 block and half a steal per game, shooting 38.5% behind the arc on 3.3 attempts per game. He is a very good center, and I believe that he'll be a better player than Montrezl Harrell was for the Los Angeles Clippers. He can be a starter or he can be the 6th man, depending on however the Clippers want to use him. And I believe that it'll help them go to the Western Conference Finals this season. But I believe that $226 million extension for Paul George really messed them up, because they could have signed somebody else with all that extra free money. It's all good though, because they're going to be bad by the end of the decade. The Los Angeles Clippers offseason grade for me definitely has to be a B. It's a solid grade, but they could have gotten one more. They could have gotten a really good playmaker such as Derrick Rose or another underrated playmaker in the NBA right now. Moving on to my number 3 spot, it's the Portland Trail Blazers. The Portland Trail Blazers barely made the playoffs this year in a play-in tournament, but they still made the playoffs. And they signed Derrick Jones Jr., who is a great bench depth, who averaged 8.5 points per game, 3.9 rebounds, half a block, an assist, and 1 steal per game. They also traded for Robert Covington, who averaged 12.4 points per game, 6.6 rebounds per game, 1.3 assists, 1.6 steals, and 1 block a game. I believe that he is best utilized as a forward and not as a center, like the Rockets were using him. I believe that the Trailblazers will use him well, and also use him as a very good 3-point shooter, because he did shoot 30% from 3 this season, and he is a very good defender. He's about 6'7" and is a lights out shooter and is an amazing defender, and I believe that'll help out Portland this season, especially with Carmelo's age getting up there. I believe that the Portland Trail Blazers will make the playoffs this season as a 6th seed, and their offseason grade for me will definitely be a B+. It's a great offseason, and I believe they could have signed one more defensive wing, but it's all good for them because I believe that they can still make the playoffs this year with high expectations. Maybe. I believe that they have a better matchup with the Nuggets as the 3rd seed. Moving on to my second best offseason underrated is definitely the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets, they signed Christian Wood, DeMarcus Cousins, traded for John Wall, and if all of these players are healthy, they can definitely make it to the playoffs, maybe even the 3rd round Western Conference Finals, but we'll talk about that in another video. Let's talk about Christian Wood per 36 minutes. He averages 22 points, 10 rebounds per game, a block and a half, and 1 steal per game. After Andre Drummond got traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers, he stepped up for the Pistons and helped out tremendously. He also shot pretty well from the 3 and is a great defensive center. The Marcus Cousins in his prime before that Achilles tear averaged 25.2 points per game, 11.9 rebounds per game, 3.9 assists, a block and a half, and a steal and a half per game. This guy in his prime was considered the best center in the league, and which he deserved because he was also very good from the 3-point line, shooting through 36% from the 3. He is a great player, and I believe that when he's fully healthy, no other big man could really stop him. And in this game, you are seeing his highlights from his 44-point game, 24 rebounds, 10 assists, and 4 steals. That's what prime DeMarcus Cousins could do before he got injured in January of 2018. Also, the Rockets really needed, center depth because they traded away their only center that they had in Clint Capella for some random guy, Robert Covington, I think. And I believe that they'll really use their length to their advantage because they could really use that. And I believe that this is a great signing for them, and so be it. Let's move on to John Wall, who in his prime averaged 20 points, 10 assists, 4.5 rebounds per game, 2 steals, and basically a block per game. He is also a very injury-prone player who tore his Achilles when he was home, and also had a heel infection, and also had apparently 2 broken bone spurs in his foot. But when this guy is fully healthy, he was considered the best point guard in the East and considered one of the best players in this league, which is no doubt a respectable sign because this player is cold-blooded. John Wall is a great playmaker, and he is very similar to Russell Westbrook in ways, but he's not pushing himself to the point where he's literally had the longest streak in NBA history for most turnovers in a row in one game. They also got rid of Russell Westbrook's massive contract. He was going to get paid $91 million in 2 seasons. But that's not it. My biggest concern and question for the Houston Rockets is, can they keep their health together? The Houston Rockets players are full of injuries. DeMarcus Cousins and John Wall both tore their Achilles, and DeMarcus Cousins tore his ACL, and I believe that those are both career-ending injuries or career slowing down. But if they're all fully healthy, I give the Houston Rockets offseason grade a A-. If they're all healthy, they're probably going to make the playoffs. And moving on to my number 1 spot, it's the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks had a great offseason. They stepped up their game this season. They signed Bogdan Bogdanovic, who averaged 15 points, 3.9 rebounds per game, and 3.9 assists per game. He is definitely considered one of the best shooters in the NBA right now and considered a very underrated player. He is a very good shooter despite playing for Sacramento, and he shot 37.5% from the 3 on 7.2 attempts per game. I believe that if the Atlanta can use him right, they'll definitely make the playoffs. And so if they use Danilo Gallinari right too. Danilo Gallinari averaged 18.7 points per game this season, 5.2 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. He shot 40% from the 3-point arc and is definitely one of the best shooters in the NBA right now. He is also considered one of the most consistent players throughout his entire career because he's averaged 16 points for his entire career. I believe that if they use their assets right, they can really make the playoffs this year. Maybe sneak in that 8th seed, maybe even the 7th seed if possible. But they also signed 2 underrated point guards and 2 great defensive point guards, which will help out Trae Young. Trae Young is a very good point guard, but he's not good defensively. Trae Young is a horrible defender in my opinion, and they signed Chris Dunn, who is one of the best defensive players in the league. He averaged 10 points this season, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds, and he's considered, in my opinion, he is way better than Patrick Beverley on defense. He is a Marcus Smart type player. He's built tough, he's small for his size, but he can definitely make up for it with his grittiness. He's a lockdown defender, again, as I said, averaging 2 steals and half a block per game, and is basically an all-defensive guard with that potential. I believed he should have made all defensive second team this year or all defensive first team for, Patrick Beverley, but Patrick Beverley really didn't deserve that spot over players like Chris Dunn himself. They also signed Rajon Rondo to a deal, and Rajon Rondo he's not 2012 Rondo, but he is still a great player, and if they make the playoffs, Rondo will step it up for sure. Atlanta definitely needed this because their defense was some of the worst this season. They also got back Clint Capella from injury. He didn't play at the end of the 2019-2020 NBA regular season because of that injury. Now, Atlanta's offseason grades are definitely an A+ for me. They're the biggest winner of the offseason, despite the Lakers having Montrezl Harrell and Dennis Schroeder. They're definitely the biggest winners. And so long.